Most new real estate investors have no idea what a purchase agreement even looks like. And when they start their journey, they don't typically have someone who's there for them to explain the nitty-gritty details of this very important contract. So in today's video, I'm gonna be teaching you the purchase agreement and going through it line by line so that you can be confident about the offers that you make. And if you are new to the channel, my name's Justin You're. I'm a real estate investor and entrepreneur here in Las Vegas. I've made hundreds of videos teaching people about real estate. And the goal of this channel is to help you grow your money and mindset. Also, if you wanna see more personal content, follow me on Instagram at Justin You're. And before I begin, let me just throw out a disclaimer out there that this is not legal advice. I'm not an attorney, so don't take this as legal advice. I just wanted to give you a general perspective on what a contract might say. If you decide to use this exact contract, and you can if you go to the link in the description below, but if you use this exact contract, make sure to have your attorney or your title company review the contract before you put it to use so that it makes sense in your particular state. All right, so let's get right into it. What you're looking at right now is the real estate residential purchase and sale agreement. This agreement or this contract is also known as and referred to as an RPA for residential purchase agreement. So if I ever say RPA, you know what I'm talking about. First line we're gonna be looking at is the very first thing. This purchase and sale agreement is entered by and between. Right here on this line, you enter the seller's name and you enter the buyer's name, which is you yourself. In the buyer's name, you can either be using your personal name or an LLC if you do have one. Common question that people ask is, do you need an LLC before you start buying homes? And the quick answer is no, you do not need one. If you are going to continue doing this and purchasing a lot of homes, I do recommend you get one. But when you're just starting out, no, you do not need one. Entered by and between seller and buyer. Buyer and seller referred to jointly as the parties. Next line we look at is the description of the property. So here you just enter the street address, city, state, zip code. The next thing that you enter is the APN, and if you do not know what an APN is, it's the assessor's parcel number. So pretty much every single property out there has a parcel number that's attached to it. Think of it like a social security number for a property. So we as humans have a social security number to identify us, and our names are essentially like these home addresses. But for properties, the parcel numbers are basically properties' social security numbers, if that makes sense. And then this next line here is saying property is sold in as-is condition. This is pretty much us saying to the seller or the homeowner that, hey, we're buying this as is. You don't have to do any fixes, like we just wanna buy it as is in this exact condition. Next thing that we're gonna be looking at is, let's read this line right here. Property includes all fixtures, window and floor coverings, built-in appliances, draperies, including hardware, shades, blinds, window and door screens. Any personal property remaining in or on the property after the sale of the property shall be the buyer's property. So this line specifically is saying that if the seller is going to leave any personal property in the home and it's still in there like after the home is sold, it's now ours, the buyer. So any personal properties in the home, it's ours. So you can always encourage the seller to leave stuff in the home if they don't want to move anything or they just have junk, and then you can take care of it to make it easier on them. But this is just a clause saying that, hey, like if you leave some stuff in the home, like it's ours, we're gonna either junk it or keep it, but it's ours, it's not yours anymore. The next thing that we look at, number 2, is the purchase price. The seller shall convey to the property to the buyer for the sum of, this is the dollar amount written out completely. So if it's a $100,000 home, you're gonna write $100,000 like letters, like 100,000. And then in this section right here, to clarify it, you have to write the dollar amount. So like 100, like $100,000. Seller acknowledges that the price may not represent fair market value for the property. So this line is essentially us telling the homeowner, the seller, that, hey, we're buying this property as is, and this is not representative of like what is fair market for the property. We're buying this as a discount because we need to make a profit on the home. So this is us kind of letting the seller know right away, like, hey, this isn't representing fair market value. We're buying this at a discount to make money. Closing cost and taxes. Number 1, all closing costs and title fees are to be paid by. So usually I will pay the closing costs, title fees as the buyer just to make it easier on these sellers, but this spot is blank just in case you decide to negotiate and have the seller pay for it for whatever reason. Same thing here, transfer taxes are to be paid by. Usually I'll pay for that stuff, but it's always negotiable, always negotiable. So third line, property taxes, sewer, trash, HOA fees, SIDS lids, or other assessments will be prorated at the close of escrow. Seller shall pay all liens recorded against the property at close of escrow. So this first line that you're looking at right here, the property taxes, sewer, trash, stuff that's gonna be prorated at the close of escrow. If you don't know what prorated means, it basically means this. So if you're going to close on a property on the 15th of the month. If you close on the property on the 15th of the month and maybe the seller has unpaid things, like maybe HOA fees, for example, and they paid for it at the very beginning of the month on March 1st and 15 days have gone by, but they already paid HOA fee for the entire month. If you close the property on the 15th of the month, prorated means that now you are going to have to pay for only day 16 through 31 of the month. The first half of the month, that's gonna be paid from the seller's pocket, and then you're paying the other half. So that's essentially what prorated means, is that depending on when you close on the property, there's gonna be a fair split of like whenever you close. So if you close on the 10th, the seller would only have to pay for the 9 or 10 days, and then you'd pay for the other 20 or so. So that's what that means. The next line that we will look at, or I just mentioned, was the seller shall pay all liens recorded against the property at the close of escrow. And if you don't know what a lien is, it's essentially the legal right to a property, usually used as collateral for a debt. So for example, if you got in trouble and you did not pay a creditor back, you owed them money, maybe it was someone you owed $10,000 to for whatever reason, and you decided not to pay it, they would have the right to put a lien on your house. I think depending on whatever it was, but they could put a lien on your house for $10,000. So whenever that house or the home got sold, they would be entitled to keep $10,000 from the sales proceeds because you failed to pay them back. So that's basically what a lien is. So what this clause is saying is that if the seller does have any liens on the property, that when the property closes, so when you buy the home, they are responsible for paying them off. So maybe they have a lot of outstanding liens or people that they've never paid back and people put the lien on the home, they are going to be responsible for paying it. So that's what that line means. And then buyer initials this right here, seller or seller's initial right here. The next clause that we look at is the due diligence clause. So this is saying, buyer shall have a period of blank calendar days from the date that this agreement is fully signed to complete its due diligence. If you don't know what due diligence is, it's pretty much your investigative period for the home. So if you were to buy a home or you're going to buy a home, the due diligence period is your time to do your inspections or appraisals if you ever want to do that, bring out contractors. It's your time to pretty much look at the property and gather all the information that you need to decide if it's a property that you want to buy. And then the second part of this clause is seller shall ensure that buyer's representatives have reasonable access to the property during this period, meaning that you want to make sure that the seller is actually giving you and granting access to the property to do your inspections or whatever you need to do. For the due diligence period, the period really depends on your experience and what you're comfortable with. Most of my due diligence periods might be like at least 10 days or something like that, maybe 7 to 14 days. But maybe if I'm looking at a home run deal or something like that, I might do a much smaller due diligence period, maybe like a 1 or 2 day due diligence because I really want the home and it's a home run deal. For most cases, if you're brand new, I at least put like a 10-day due diligence period so that you have enough time to bring out the people that you need to bring to check out the property, because more than likely, if you're brand new, you don't really know what you're doing at this point and you don't know who to bring out. So it might take you a little bit of time to kind of figure it out. So give yourself some time, but just keep in mind that the less the due diligence period is and the smaller that period is, the more attractive your offer becomes to the seller. However, some sellers don't fully understand this portion, so it kind of depends on the seller and how savvy they are. And then right here, the next line is seller to disclose any conditions that adversely affect the property's value. So the seller is supposed to tell you anything bad about the home. That's what that line means. Next thing is, anytime before the due diligence period expires, buyer may terminate this agreement by written notice of cancellation to the seller and escrow company. Escrow company shall refund earnest money deposit to the buyer without the seller's consent if within the due diligence period. Basically, whenever you buy a home, you're gonna be likely putting down an earnest money deposit, like a good faith deposit showing the seller that you're a serious buyer and that you're committed to buying the home. Well, if you end up having to back out of the deal during the due diligence period, you have a right to keep your earnest money deposit because that period was your time to investigate the property further to make sure that it's a property that you actually want to buy. If you are backing out of the deal after the due diligence period is over, then the seller does have a right to keep that deposit in most cases. Keep in mind, whoever's right it is to keep the deposit's always gonna be in escrow, and anytime money is in escrow, there's going to be a fight over it, no matter what. So just keep that in mind. Next thing that we're gonna be looking at is escrow. So this clause says, title and escrow company shall be the buyer's choice. So whoever we choose for title and escrow, it's gonna be buyer's choice. So typically I, as the buyer, like to choose my title officer in the title company because I'm comfortable with them and I know what they can do for me. However, sometimes, it's probably rare, will a seller ask or request a specific title officer or a specific title company because that's who they've used for all their years and they're comfortable with them, and it might be a deal breaker for them. I've had that one time so far, and it might happen for more, I don't know. But for the most part, I like to choose my title officer and title company. That's why it's that way in the contract. If you ever need to change it, you can easily change it. This is in a Google Doc form, and you can get this exact contract in the link below. And then it says, close of escrow shall be on or before blank. So whatever close of escrow date that you choose, maybe you choose, for example, randomly, January 31st as the close of escrow date. If that's the case, this clause says that close of escrow shall be on January 31st or before January 31st. So you can close on the date or before. Even if you close before, like 2 weeks early, it's perfectly fine because in the agreement, it says on or before. Next thing that we're going to be looking at is the earnest money deposit. So let me read this to you. Within 5 business days after this agreement has been signed by the buyer and seller, buyer shall partially perform by delivering an earnest money deposit of blank to escrow for the benefit of the seller. When it comes to your earnest money deposit, the higher that deposit is, the more attractive it becomes for that seller, but the bigger the risk that you take. I've seen earnest money deposits massive, and I've seen them super small, like $1. Like, it really depends on your negotiation with you and the seller, but for the most part, I usually put an earnest money deposit of $500. Sometimes it does depend, just whatever the seller wants, or maybe, I don't know, different situations occur. But that's what the earnest money deposit is. It's basically a good faith deposit that you put in escrow for the seller so that they have peace of mind that you're actually serious about buying the home because you've already committed a little bit of money, so you're likely gonna commit the whole purchase. The next lines outline what happens to the earnest money deposit if someone backs out, essentially. So let's read this. The earnest money deposit shall be non-refundable to buyer unless A, buyer is unable to ensure title to the property. So if the buyer cannot ensure title to the property, then the earnest money deposit is refundable to the buyer. B, seller is unable to deliver clear title to the buyer. So if the seller can't give you clear title to you, then you can back out and get your earnest money deposit back. Next thing is C, seller fails to execute all documents necessary to timely close escrow on the sale of the property. So this actually does happen where the sellers just stop agreeing and they don't want to participate anymore. They don't want to sell their home. They just don't sign anything. And in that case, you can back out. You can get your earnest money deposit back. The last thing is, or D, buyer issues timely notice of cancellation under Section 4. And Section 4 above is the due diligence period. So if you as the buyer are going to be backing out during the due diligence period, you can back out and get your earnest money deposit back. Those are the 4 scenarios that you will be able to keep your earnest money deposit. And again, this is definitely going to depend on your state and what they're comfortable with. Make sure, again, to review this contract with your attorney or title company so that it fits with your state guidelines. But the next thing that we look at is this. This provision shall be construed as consent by the seller and an instruction to escrow to return the earnest money deposit to buyer in the event of the conditions listed in the preceding paragraph. Now, this is pretty important because often the title company will always say, like, if someone has to back out, they're like, okay, like, what happens to earnest money deposit? So this makes it super clear, like, if someone backs out or the agreement has to be canceled, it's this paragraph, this mini paragraph says, follow these exact instructions if someone backs out, like follow these guidelines right here. So it makes it very clear. That's what that says. The next clause, number 7, involves tenants. So if one or more tenants are occupying the property right here, then 1, any rental income will be prorated at the close of escrow. So this is kind of similar to the proration of expenses that we talked about earlier. So let's say you close the home on the 15th, like the previous example, and the seller already received rent for that month. So when you were going to buy the home, the seller's only gonna keep half of that rent because it's gonna be day 1 through day 15. And then for day 16 through 31, you're going to be keeping that as the buyer. So escrow takes care of that, but this is what this contract is telling the escrow officers of how to instruct the rent. But this contract and this clause is pretty much telling the escrow officers what to do with the rent. Next clause we look at is 2, seller shall provide all leases to buyer before the close of escrow. So before close of escrow, sellers to provide you as the buyer all the leases, all the paperwork for tenants. Number 3, seller shall provide all security deposits, cleaning deposits, keys, or other tenant deposits to the buyer before the close of escrow. Anyways, this is just pretty much saying seller should provide these things to you before close of escrow. And then you initial this, seller initials this, and you move on. And this page right here is just any additional terms, anything else that you agree upon with you and the seller, you can write stuff right here. Now this could be absolutely anything. Like it could be something like leasing back the home. So for example, maybe the seller tells you that you can buy the home at this date, but they need an extra 2 weeks in the home just to gather all their stuff and move out. Then sometimes you can do a lease back and say that, hey, they're gonna pay rent for these 2 weeks after we close. Like that could be an additional agreement. Like you can literally negotiate anything. I believe in my first wholesale deal, I think I negotiated something about taking care of the dog. So in that particular deal, the homeowner had 16 little puppies lying around and they were struggling to take care of them because they didn't really have a lot of money. And I remember buying them dog food, and then in the agreement on the contract, I believe I agreed to pay some amount to get those dogs fixed so that they can give them to like a no-kill shelter, because that was something that was important to them. And so that deal, that was like my first wholesale deal, that made me realize that you can negotiate anything. There's even this one time where I heard of a friend or someone who negotiated like an actual dog. Like they wanted to buy the home, but they wanted the dog to be included. And you know, the wife didn't want it. She talked to the husband, they ended up agreeing upon it, and someone bought the home with the dog. So like you can negotiate anything, just keep that in mind. The next thing that we look at are just miscellaneous items. So number one, neither buyer nor seller are represented by a licensed real estate agent. No commissions are due or payable in connection with this transaction. Now this is very important because even if you are a licensed real estate agent, or even if the seller is a licensed real estate agent, this is saying that there are no agents involved. Even though you are agents, you are not representing yourself, you're not representing the seller, you're not acting in the seller's best interest, you're just buying the home, you're the buyer, they're the seller. That's all this is. If you are an agent, you probably should have another clause in there saying something super specific of like, hey, I am a licensed real estate agent. Something like that. Like you should have something in there and just disclose. Number two, buyer may assign its rights under this agreement. This pretty much gives you the ability to wholesale the deal because you can assign this contract. It's very clear buyer can assign rights of this agreement. And number three, seller is aware that buyer is purchasing the property to make a profit and may or may not market the property for sale or for lease, including on the MLS. Now, this gives you the ability as a buyer to market the property on the MLS to maybe find buyers if you're planning to wholesale it. I've never done it, but you have the option to do so with that clause. Of course, it depends on your state and their regulations because I don't think all states allow that. Number four, in the event of a dispute concerning the interpretation or enforcement of this agreement, the prevailing party shall recover reasonable attorney fees and costs. So attorneys get paid. It's just like legal jargon that you have to include. And number five, this offer expires at 9 p.m. Pacific Standard Time on this day, blank. So you can always change the time, change the date, but you always want to have some type of expiration so that there's some type of urgency involved with any offer that you make. So you want the seller to know, hey, this offer does expire. If you don't accept it by this date, then we're out, we're done. And if they know that, there's some urgency and it kind of gives them incentive or more incentive to just accept the deal. Then we go. This agreement shall go into effect upon the signatures of buyer and seller. Our signatures below indicate acceptance of all terms in this agreement. So if you agree to everything and the seller agrees to everything, you guys all sign below. Seller here and here if there's two sellers, and then you sign right here. So that's it. That's all the contract really is. Just know you don't need a real estate agent to create a contract, and you don't have to be an attorney. That could be a simple contract that you can use, and if you want to use that exact same one, the link is in the description below. You can get it for free. Also, if you want help to grow your real estate business, whether you are brand new or if you already have deals under your belt, DM me the word coach on Instagram at JustinYou'reWrong. Peace.